Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. This is now officially the fourth time I have tried starting this podcast. I joke around a lot that I do not have a good relationship with tech. And you know how they say what you think you create? I'm pretty sure I'm creating that reality for myself. Oh, I've had books fall on my microphone. I've had things shut off. It's just been one thing after another. So let's hope and pray that we can finally get through this recording. And who knows, maybe I was meant to say something different in this recording than I was the last four times. All right. I'm just going to breathe and I'm just going to surrender and I'm just going to let things happen the way that it needs to. So, first off, I just want to acknowledge the fact that we are in February. I don't know how you guys are feeling about this, but it is crazy for me to think that we are already 1 month down in the month or in the year of 2024. Crazy. I think it's a great opportunity for us, just as a reminder that these little moments like this, being February 1st, it depends on when you're listening to this, obviously, but I think these are great little bookends, I guess you could say, to look back and evaluate where we have been. And I like to do this all of the time, but I think it's an easy end cap or bookending, like I said, to look at the end of January and say, okay, from this moment, I'm going to give myself some space to evaluate, what is working, what is not working, what can I do differently going into February, especially with setting intentions, right? I think setting intentions it's a great thing for us to look back and say, okay, so the things that I planned or the way that I wanted to go about doing this, how did it go? Was I able to remember it? Was I not? And just really be honest and take some time to really reflect, because otherwise I think of it, we can set these intentions or these goals and then we can hope and pray that it works. And then we can look back on, at the end of this year and go, well, it didn't happen again. And then, try again without doing anything different. And so setting an intention, but then also setting these little moments throughout the year, I think is the way that we can have those small and simple things make great things come to pass, right? So I think right now is a great opportunity for us to look back and just to really evaluate, how are things going? How is your intention going? How's your goals going? And just give yourself to a moment to reflect with no judgment. And so I've been doing that a little bit, besides having all the tech issues, but really looking back and deciding, okay, 1 month down, and my word for this year, my intention for this year is connection. And how is it going? And I saw someone's Instagram post recently. I was like, oh my gosh, this is totally how I've been feeling. I'm sure maybe some of you guys can resonate with this, but there's 30 days, there's 31 days, depending on the month. But I feel like this month, I don't know if it's every January, but this month, it just feels like it's got like 3,000 days. It's like been the longest month. So some part of me is just like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful we finally made it to February. But it's also like, oh my gosh, we are in February. Like my senior graduates in just a couple months. It's just crazy to me. So I've been looking back on this last month and really deciding, okay, what do I want to really focus on for this next month? And one of those areas is I've been actually really, really good with my connection to myself, as far as, creating some space to do my scripture study, as well as just sitting in silence. I've been doing really, really well with that. But there's pillars in our lives, right? Success is multifaceted. Connection. My word for the year is multifaceted. I want to be connected in every area of my life. And one of those is in relationships and with my husband. And I always think, what you think you create, kind of what I said with the tech stuff. But I think, having this connection as my intention, it's almost like, okay, you want to test that? We're going to test that desire for the connection in this relationship area. And so I want to kind of reflect on this a little bit and also share with you some insights with this. But back in October of last year, I did a coaching session with my coach that forever changed the direction that I was going with my connection to myself. And I think that's where I even got the idea of having connection as my word, because for the longest time, and I've shared much about this, but it's always a great reflection point for myself. But for the longest time, I have really set my intention as doing, right? I want to focus on all of the steps. I need to know all of the steps as to where I'm going and what is required of me. I love figuring things out to fix things. I love fixing things, actually. It gives me something to think through, and I enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoy figuring things out, researching things. I'm really good at multitasking. I'm good at breaking things down. Give me a big event, give me a big task, and I will break it down. Sometimes it can be confusing. I'm not going to say that I'm perfect at it, but I enjoy those little things like that. Give me a problem and I will find the solution for it. And so it's a strength of mine. I acknowledge that. I see this as a strength that I can see things, I can work through things. However, this last year, as I am doing some reflection, I have been doing that a lot as we have, ended 2023, going into 2024. I've been looking back and acknowledging the fact that there's been a lot of things that happened this last year that I could not have predicted. Now, can we ever really predict the future? I don't think so. But I think it's really interesting to look back on this last year to see that really there's been a lot of opportunities for me to go deep with a lot of work. And it still is, it's happening to this day. Like I've done a lot of foundational work up to this point, but last year it gave me so many areas in my life where it's like, okay, you've done this. Now let's go deeper. And last year, I think I can't remember if it was August or September, I attended a 3-day retreat with my coach, and I learned so much. And I've talked about him quite a bit. Kyle Cease. He's an amazing guy. He really dives into the emotion work. It's awesome stuff. And it definitely still, I notice I'm still finding there's a lot of growth. Let me just put it that way. There's a lot of growth that I need to still have. Not need to. I love all my language. But anyways, I notice there's a lot of area of growth that I want to have when it comes to this emotion work. And so I did this 3-day retreat, and I was able to start to see little glimmers, little steps in my emotion progress. And it really made me excited to kind of go deeper with it. And so I went and got somatic emotion work training, which is awesome and it's amazing. But what I noticed, I'm going to call myself out here and acknowledge what I was doing is basically I was learning with my brain about emotion work. And I'm not saying there's not power in that, right? I think again, there's power in our brain. It's a huge strength of ours. That is how we learn. However, because of my strength being in my brain, and I don't know if, well, there's probably people that their strength is their heart, but for I think majority of you guys that are listening, you probably resonate with this. But because the fact that my strength is my brain, it is that voice, the voice that I've trained myself to listen to is way louder than my emotions, right? Way louder than my heart. And you may have heard this phrase before. I've heard this a lot lately. I think maybe I've shared it on the podcast, but if not, this is just a good refresher for ourselves. I've heard this recently where they're saying the longest journey that we have to go through in this life is nothing that's going to be on the outside of us. It is actually just these simple 18 inches. I've heard 12 to 18 inches, whatever is actually true. I don't know. I didn't measure this, but it is actually those 18 inches between our head and our heart. And if you really sit and ponder that for a second, there, it is so true. It is definitely what I'm going through right now. And I think for many of you guys going here on the podcast, during the workshop last week, we were talking about this of like, okay, where's your area of growth? And a lot of you guys said it was learning to be more in touch with your emotions. That's been the biggest thing for you to try and work through. And I think that's most humans, honestly. And so I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that. Like it really is. It's not journeys necessarily from one side of the country to another or to another continent or whatever. It's literally the longest journey for us to understand is from the head to the heart. And we are so good with our thinking. I mean, we really are. And I think that's why thought work is so transformational to start, because we can learn about the power of our thinking, and that changes so much. It takes us off of autopilot for many of us in our lives. However, thought work still keeps us up in one portion of our body, right? It keeps us from the neck up, our head. And so when I went to that 3-day retreat, I became very aware of how closed off I still have been with my emotions. And what was really, I started to notice little things waking up within me. And so I really wanted to start to connect more to my heart. And I think that's really important for us to kind of pause here just for a second and acknowledge this for a second. And I want you guys to ask yourselves if this is something that resonates for you. And I think for many of you guys, you keep coming back to this podcast because something is calling to you, right? There's your understanding, hearing this idea around thought work and emotion work and what is the difference between the two. And maybe some of you are like, okay, I really want to work on this emotion work. And I want you to spend some time, if you haven't already, really figuring out what your why is behind that. Because I've thought about this for myself. If I'm doing anything just to check off the boxes, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, I notice it's not very long lasting and it's not very fulfilling. And it doesn't really, I don't stay there very long. Versus if I'm doing something with an intention, with a why, then it helps me to get through the hard things. So that's why I think it's so good for us to acknowledge the part of the workshop that we did this last week was understanding the difference between goals and intentions. I love goals, but if you don't have an intention behind the goals just become to-do list items. And I think that's why so many people fail. And so if you start with your intention, having a purpose, having a why, and then going into the tasks or the things to check off your list, it's a totally different experience. And so if you are going into emotion work or in heart work and you're just doing it as a to-do list item of like, oh, well, I guess this is, the next thing, this is what everybody's talking about is emotion work, you're going to find that it's going to be very hard for you to really open up and to really see the value in it versus, you know what, I want to do it for this reason. And having a really connected reason as to your why. Because doing emotion work it's very uncomfortable for us to do. And it's very worthwhile. But if you think about the different languages, right? We know the language of our brain. We're very aware of our thinking. Most of you guys are very aware of our thinking, but turning on the language to our heart is very uncomfortable. And it requires us to surrender. And that's a loss of control. And I know many of you guys are like me and love the control, right? So if you don't have a why, it's very easy for us to be like, nah, that's too hard, or it's not working for me, and go right back up to what we're comfortable with, that neck up approach. So it's important for if you don't have a reason besides Chantel just tells me to, I implore you to spend some time, and I know I'm going to say this, it sounds weird, think about it. Thinking can be beneficial here, but know your reason why. What is your reason why for wanting to do heart work? What is your reason why for wanting to connect more to your emotions? Because if it's just because somebody else tells you to do it, that's not going to be a good enough reason. It's just like anything that we do in our world, right? I think I shared this last week on the podcast with my daughter, who we were talking about reading her scriptures. And she's like, I don't know why I'm reading the scriptures. Everybody just tells me to do it. And I'm like, don't do it then. Because if you don't have a reason why, you're not going to get anything out of it. So you do need to be bought into this. So I sat for myself and I kind of asked at the beginning of this year of like, okay, well, what's my why as far as emotion work goes? What's my why from getting to know my inner child? And for me, I've shared this so much. Obviously, it's my word for this year. It's that connection, but it's because this is what I think. This is my understanding of this is because emotion is a connection frequency. It is a connection conduit. If you think about anything in our lives that is worth doing or living or being a part of, emotion is what brings the color to it. Emotion is what brings the fulfillment to it. It brings it's everlasting, I think, with that emotion work. If a relationship, it cannot live in just the brain. A relationship in just thoughts is nothing, honestly, if it does not have that true intimacy, which is connection with the emotions. Discipleship, if you think about that with our religion, if it's only all we do is just learn and consume and read, that's not true discipleship. That's still the neck up. Discipleship is, yes, learning about things, but it is going within and actually feeling it. Our faith and our everything is within the heart, right? And even faith, it actually can't be faith. Yes, there's evidence that can happen from it, but if you think about all of the evidence that is given to us, that doesn't sell us on our faith and our discipleship. It comes from a feeling, comes from being with it. Friendship is nothing if it's all in our minds. It has to come through feeling. So emotions, this is my reason why, is the connection, right? Is the connection frequency. And that is what matters. And that is what keeps me going when it's hard, keeps me going when it does not feel very, very comfortable. That is my why. That is my why to doing this work. And it requires me to do the one thing that I think I've shied away from a lot. And it is a buzzword that we hear a lot recently, actually, is vulnerability. So doing connection work with my emotions, it's vulnerable. It's very uncomfortable for us. And it is actually the thing that has required of us to be able to grow and to change and go to the next level. It is not the easiest, and it is not the funnest for us to explore. So I found myself a lot this last year thinking my way through a lot of things, thinking my way through my growth and my emotion work, which again, I'm not saying it does not have a place. There is a place for this, but it still left me in this gap that was made aware to me by my amazing husband. So I'm going to talk about this for a second. I'm going to get personal for a second. Hopefully he'll forgive me. I'm not actually exposing anything of him. It's actually of myself, but it came through him. So I shared a lot about this last year about my relationship with my husband and some of the work that I've done with him. And I am so grateful for him. We've been married for almost 20 years this May. No, almost 20 years, because this May is our 20th anniversary, which is just insane to me to think we've been married 20 years. But we've grown through a lot, and it has not been easy. It has required us to do a lot of hard things and be willing to have some very, very vulnerable conversations. And I've grown a ton because of my marriage, because of this relationship. I tell myself this, and I see this a lot with other people that I work with within their marriages. I think we marry the person that's going to give us our greatest growth opportunity. Doesn't mean sometimes we stay in the marriage all of the time, but I think we marry the person that's going to help us to grow the most. It helps us, they give us the lessons that we need to go through. And that is definitely the case with my husband. So I shared a little bit about this last year, but we had some hard conversations to talk about where I was holding myself back in our relationship and how it was creating this major disconnect with us. And I walked away from that conversation resolved and ready, thinking my way through and being like, yes, I'm totally going to do this. But I think I was thinking my way through that resolution and also white knuckling through the things that I heard from him and wanted to change, right? I was willing to try this, but I started doing things in my relationship. I started doing my way through the relationship. I love my husband. He is absolutely amazing. However, I started to just check off boxes in my relationship. And well, recently, and I could feel this. I'm not going to lay this out and say I was blindsided by this whatsoever. If I'm being very honest with myself, I could feel this. But recently, it was having an effect on our marriage, that I was trying to do our way through our marriage again, because this has been a revolving door, a revolving issue that has really hit home this time. And so my resolve to try and do things differently, my resolve to do things to check off boxes was having a major disconnect or creating a disconnect in our relationship. I was all in my head, and I had made it more of like a transactional relationship than anything else. And I almost, if again, being honest, you're going to hear me say this a lot because I'm being honest here, but I guess it's the vulnerability in me. But I noticed that I was being a victim to the relationship. Like, I'm doing all of the things, isn't that good enough type of thing, right? And if I notice, I think this happens for a lot of people when they're in that victim place, right? Blaming other people. I think it's a protection mechanism that we put up in place to prevent us, to help us, to protect us. That's our brain saying that, by the way. It's not true. We don't need protection from it, but it's our brain thinking that if we blame and we're the victim in this situation, then we don't have to feel. We don't have to go neck below. And I noticed that a lot for myself, that, if I stay the victim, if I can just blame him and say, like, you're the one that needs to change or whatever, I'm doing all of these things and you're not doing these things, it keeps me in my head. It's an easy place for me to be. But it took a toll because it became apparent that I had left emotion out of our relationship again, not intentionally. I look back and I not that I understand. I don't understand all of the reasons why, but it was just easier for me to disconnect than it was for me to engage emotionally in our relationship. And it, like I said, it's been taking a toll. And so my husband is amazing. He came to me a couple weeks ago and he basically said, and he's so patient with me, you guys. I seriously tell myself all the time, I do not deserve him. But he told me that basically he's gotten to this place where he's resolved that he needs to be the one to change, that he needs to just stop desiring the emotion part as much in our relationship because he knew it was so hard for me to emotionally engage. And this hit hard for me. It hit hard. I was crushed for him. And I could have easily gone back into my head and been the victim and the shame and all that kind of stuff. But I knew this was an opportunity for me to kind of sit back and reflect. It's not easy for me to swallow this pill and say, like, Chantel, you've really got to figure this out. Not in a have-to way. But I knew that this was going to serve him and us in the long run if I could be vulnerable here in this place. I wanted to change for him. I wanted to change because this was the next area of growth for myself. I wanted that connection in our marriage emotionally. However, the thing that's been holding me back is that journey, right? The journey from my head to my heart. I knew, and I could think, I know, okay, let's even go there. I know that I love my husband. That has never been a question for me. And I think that's been so hard. I'm like, you should just know. You should just know that I love you. But it was cut off at the shoulders. And that is just, again, not that we can control anybody else, but me showing up as being the person that I wanted to be. I wanted to change that. I wanted it to be more neck below for our relationship. And that's not easy for me to do. It's not to turn on that for myself. And so, like I said before, what we think we create, right? So I knew that this was an opportunity because I had set my intention as connection. This was an opportunity for me to live into this, to really grow in this way. And, I had said that I wanted this connection with my husband. And here was that opportunity. And it was so scary for me to have this moment for myself to be like, here we are again, Chantel. Like, are you going to do the same thing again? Are you going to go up into your brain? Are you going to tell yourself you're going to change, but do nothing different? Like it's a scary place for me to have to really be vulnerable with myself, to open my heart, to let myself melt a little bit, to let him in a little bit, letting it be awkward for a little bit. I mean, that was some of the things that I think I had to acknowledge is like the fear that I had was it being awkward for me to be more vulnerable in so many ways. And some of you have heard this expression have you heard me express this to you before? And others, I think this might sound like a crazy talk, but I have struggled for majority of our marriage to be emotionally intimate. Not even just with my husband, but even with my kids. Saying that I love you, giving hugs, physical touch of any kind, holding hands, snuggling, any of that. It has been very, very hard for me to do. And I've tried, different things. I've tried looking at it. I actually bought a book. It was about a year ago now that I bought it, but I finally read it actually because of the situation. But it's this book called I've Attached. And I don't like to box ourselves in. We got to be careful with this. Like there's personality tests and there's all of these things. And we have to be careful if you're willing to do those things to not use it as like, oh, this is just how I am. But I do also believe that these things can show us and help us to be aware of why we do what we do and help us to give us an understanding of ourselves so that we can change if we want to. And so I bought this book about a year ago. It's called Attached. It's all about the different styles of attachment that we have in our relationships. And so I know some of you guys have heard this because this is also another thing that I'm seeing in the self-development world that people are starting to play around with. But there's what they call the anxiously attached, there's the avoidant attached, and there's the secure attached. And I was reading this book, and again, it's not black and white. I don't say I resonate with everything, but there's a lot of it that I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm the avoidant in the relationship. And even though I want it, I want that intimacy in my relationships, but I've been very much an avoidant. And a couple of the reasons that I've become aware of is because of that safety. It's safe for me to just stay independent. It's scary to be vulnerable with somebody. And when I was younger, I learned that it was safer for me to only rely on myself for everything. And if I relied on somebody else, then I would either be abandoned or it would not be safe for me to do so. So I learned to keep my distance. And what I'm realizing is that doesn't work for me anymore. It may have worked at the time. And that's what it's good for us to realize is these patterns, they had a purpose. We're not going to like beat them up and shame them and blame our history or our childhood. It's an understanding there of just like, oh yeah, it probably did serve me at that time, but it's not working for me anymore. So my work now is to help me to acknowledge that fear, to notice that fear, to move with that fear, the fear of looking stupid, the fear of relying on somebody else, and possibly being left alone or not having them think or feel the same way that I do, and just learning to feel it, connecting to myself, knowing and saying what I want. You guys, that is scary for me to say, to be able to say, you know what, hey, I want to spend some time with you. Like that's scary. And I know for some of you guys are like, that's really weird, but that is my work. My awareness has showed me this. Saying I love you, hugging, all of these things have been so hard for me. And it's because of that disconnect. But as I work on this, the intimacy in my marriage has changed. And I'm still in the beginning stage of this. I'm not saying I'm perfected with this. And there's a part of me that fears that I'm going to do this cycle again and it's just going to repeat itself again. But I've noticed the more that I'm working on this journey from my head to my heart, that there is a connection, there's an intimacy that has affected not just I know sometimes we say intimacy as in the sexual way. It's not that I'm talking about. I'm talking about emotionally, mentally, and yes, the physical side of it, but just more in the hugging and the kissing and the touching. And as I've been doing this, it feels like home. It feels like home, but it is so scary for me to be there. So it's learning to help my body into that neck below to show myself like it's safe. It's safe for me to be in this place. It's safe for you to open up. It's safe for you to be vulnerable in this way. And just quickly, I had to share, kind of like I was mentioning, I was talking to my coach back in October about this and mentioning to my fear about it was actually related to my business at the time, but it's all related, right? I always think of, if you're working on your business, you're also working on your relationships, you're also working on your life. Like, I don't think it's one or the other. Again, multifaceted. But I was talking to him back in October about my business and what to do next, and fearing, other things that were going on in my life. And he had me slow down for a second. And he had me put my hand on my heart, and he had me take a couple deep breaths and told me just to settle there. And it did not feel comfortable for me to do this. But he had me just sit there and to breathe. And then he told me to ask my heart, or to share, not even to ask my heart, but just to share with my heart my concern or my worry about my business, and, ask it what I should do next, and just kind of just sit with it for a second and see what would happen and see what the heart would offer. And it was the craziest experience for me to just to sit there and be connected to my heart. My brain is like, tell me the how, tell me the next steps, right? Tell me what I need to do. But when I access my heart, it's this, it's not a very comfortable feeling, but it's like, it doesn't say anything. That's one thing, right? My heart doesn't say anything. It doesn't tell me what to do. It's more of this peace. It's more of this trust of just like, everything's going to be fine. Like, you don't need to figure this out. You just need to just connect more to this in order for you to take action. Because my brain wants to be in control all of the time, in my relationships, in my business, in my health, everything. It's like, it wants to come online and tell me all the things to do. But that does not work anymore. It doesn't. I've got to be connected more to my heart. And it's very uncomfortable because the doer, the fixer, the solution person wants to come online. It wants to be like, no, you got to figure this out. But that's because it's a habit and it's safe. It feels safe for me to access that. Jumping into my heart is like me jumping off a cliff. It really does not feel the greatest. But yet it does at the same time. It feels like home. That's what I meant by, it feels like home, but it's also a very unsettling feeling at the same time. And until you try it, I don't think you'll understand this, but it feels like home. And the more I practice being there, the more I practice listening from the heart, the more I practice talking from the heart, the more I access the heart, the more I experience what that language is. And it is so powerful. The connection that I've already felt in my marriage, it's unbelievable. It is so different. And I notice there's parts of me that wants to self-sabotage. That's one thing that I find very interesting, is I want to self-sabotage and I want to overthink it, or I want to go back to the way that I was before. But I keep reminding myself of my intention of connection, connect, stay in the heart, stay here. And it is so powerful. I see this with my scripture study. I was doing this morning. My brain wants to overthink this and it wants to, get the agenda and figure this out. But I'm like, no, if I just stay here, I actually don't need to know anything. I don't need to figure anything out. I just can sit here with this feeling that I have. And it's crazy when I do this, how kind of like I was mentioning at the very beginning, the frequency of color and connection that I have in my day. I know this sounds weird. I think even as I'm saying this, I'm like, it sounds so weird, Chantel, what you're saying, but it's connection. And I want to help you connect more from your brain to your heart. There's something there that helps us to be a more fulfilling, easy person, easy spirit when we do that. And that is why I'm super excited to tell you guys, if you guys don't know about this already, I've created CCP. It's called the CALM Connection Project. And it's a baby project of mine that I am super excited about. And I want to help you with this journey from your head to your heart. We're gonna definitely spend time in the thought work and work on those stories if needed. But it's more about that connection to the heart and being able to be vulnerable and spend some time. And so if you're curious about wanting to do that, maybe you even need help setting your why and figuring out your why to begin with, then CCP would be a great opportunity for you. And it's a great way for, if you've never done coaching before, to get your toe in. Even if you've done coaching before, I promise you this is gonna be unlike anything else that you've tried, because I want that connection. I want that connection for you, and I want to be connected to you. And so there's going to be so many little touch points. We're going to have so many coaching calls, different kinds. I want to do meditations with you to help you understand how to connect to your heart. I want to do different topics with you of how to dive deep into your emotion work, also into relationships, also into your business if you want to. We're going to be doing a book club. I think one of the first books that we're going to be going through is At One Mint with Thomas McConkie. There's just so many things that I'm like, I want connection. And I think a lot of you guys do too. So let's do this together. And the investment is amazing. It is nothing like there's anything else out there right now. And just as a side note, there's a bonus that if you sign up and you pay for the year, then you're going to get a ticket to come to a retreat that we're going to be doing in person this fall, which is awesome. I am super excited. Again, connection of in person. And then also there's going to be connection points with myself if you do the year-long thing. So if you're interested in this, I'm going to put the link to it below. I highly encourage you come join. It would be so fun to have you in there and to do this for yourself, to do this. Because again, I think about like the more we connect to our heart, it sets the tone for our lives. It really does create color and frequency and connection that isn't available in our brain. And so if you want more of that, if you want an understanding of who you are and what you're all about and the spirit you are and all of that, then you need to come join CCP CALM Connection Project. And I would love to have you in there. So look for the link below. If you're on my email list, I'm talking about it there. If you're on my Instagram, I'm talking about it there. I would love to have you come and be a part of this tribe of people that are connecting. They're on this journey together to help us each other out. So anyways, I will talk to you guys next week. Go join CCP. Love to have you in there.